Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Police Academy, the original. And this was in 1984 and it was directed by Hugh Wilson. Now Police Academy, most people have heard of this series, and there's 7 of them, and some of them are crap, towards the end, but I believe some of them are underrated. And as a kid, I really, really, really liked the first 4. Really, you could say, although 4 not as much as the first 3. Really, the first 3. After that they started getting maybe worse and worse. Each time, and I'm revisited them. Now. Haven't seen them for years. The first one I've seen more recent than the others, but yeah, it's a series that is panned really critically. Let's just face it. The first one has got around about 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, which of course is a low score. And for a film that's spawned an actual franchise, you could say it's one of the lowest, the least critically acclaimed film really. It's a comedy, parody of cops and stuff. And yes, it's really it's quite panned, even the first one, to this day. And a lot of people thought it was absolutely crap, and Roger Ebert would famously give this film a 0 out of 4. And I really don't know how he gave it such a low score. That's not a score. That's basically his hate list. And it's got 6.7, I believe, on IMDb. And that's still not that high, but better than the actual critic scores. And yes, Police Academy. The first one. I watched it. On Friday. Rewatched it. Hadn't seen it for years, as I say. And it stars Steve Guttenberg. As Mahoney, who's kind of the main character. But really, it's these the group of characters that go to this police training academy. And by the end of it, they become cops and everything. And it's a parody on this kind of thing. Airplane, was around about 1980, I believe. And since after that, a lot more parody films started coming out. Of course, you had sort of Mel Brooks films before that, but yes, Police Academy. I can't quite see how this is panned when there's quite a lot of films that parodies and stuff that have got more acclaim than this, and the critics kind of are not as harsh on. And I was really surprised, rewatching this, because I thought it'd probably be a film that I'd still enjoy, but would not be anywhere near as good as what I remembered it to be. Based on the acclaim, and stuff. But when I watched it, really, now after watching it, I think this first Police Academy film is one of the most underrated films, of all time. It really is. And yes, it's a comedy, and it's not to be taken fully seriously. But the comedy works so well, and actually the characters, as I say, Steve Guttenberg, Mahoney, he's the kind of main character. It's kind of a rebel character. You've got yes, a lot of the characters are in some way stereotypes, of different things. But it's really quite smart stereotypes, if that can be a thing. And kind of, you've got as well Captain Harris, who's played by G.W. Bailey. One of the most memorable characters in a comedy, actually, for me. And he'd been quite a few of them. He wasn't in 2 and 3, I think, but he was in this one, and just so memorable. You've got Kim Cattrall, Bubba Smith, Michael Winslow, George Gaynes, I believe. Massive cast. Leslie Easterbrook. Massive cast. In this film, and really all the characters are enjoyable. I was quite surprised, actually, how well written this film was, because yes, it's got a lot of stereotypical humour. It relies on stereotypes and stuff, and loads of people say it's a cheap comedy film. I really disagree, and it's very, very it is a risky film. And to pull it off on this level, it was really, really hard. Hugh Wilson, done a stunning job though, because really. The first 5 minutes we'll start with. That was not that good. Let's face it. It didn't quite ease you into this film, and it wasn't quite earned, the comedy, in these parts. And a couple of bits just with Mahoney's introduction. Considering he did not act like that for the rest of the film, and as well the character of Leslie, played by Donovan Scott. His introduction, he wasn't, the problem. It was the people that were. It was kind of this. They were kind of picking on him and stuff, and a bit over the top there, a bit campy. But as well, Mahoney's introduction was not good, really. And I was thinking, it's going to be, it's not quite as good as I remembered. But really, after that, once the character of Fackler comes into it, played by Bruce Mahler. That's when it starts to pick up, really, and the really smart written comedy comes into play. You've got all these great characters, really, for me. They've all got the different traits, and just the comedy works throughout this film. But you also care. Well, anyway, I cared about these characters. You've got. It's not a narrative that's taken. It's meant to be too deep, but it's quite touching in places. Actually, it does. It is serious, really serious when it needs to be, and you do, you kind of come to care for these characters, really all of them, in their own different ways, and the comedy throughout pretty much the rest of the film works to such a great level. It all works. It's just so funny, but it never goes like some of the other sequels. After 3 in particular, they go way too far. I believe they were too. I've seen some clips as well of 7. And I never liked 6 and 7 at all. I really hated them ones, but that looks like more gross out sort of stuff. This one was a lot more controlled. The comedy never went really too far after this first 5 minutes, and it's just it's on that very fine line, and it could have stepped over, but it didn't. And I think that the characters, while they're not some of the best written characters in cinema, they are really well written, I think. While they're still, on surface stereotypes, used for a parody kind of way, manages to kind of, Hugh Wilson manages to kind of bring them out eventually. It's kind of like an Edgar Wright, where you think, it's really, it's a comedy, but underneath, under the surface, especially, films like Hot Fuzz and stuff, there's actually quite a lot of depth to the characters, and never going too deep, but it really does have some really good character development, I feel, which most of the other ones don't really have, although 2 and 3 I did like, in particular. They didn't have this level of character development that the first one had. They kind of focused more on the comedy, which is fine, but yeah, the fact is that this one did have character development. It did have a, a really just great, writing in the film, comedy, and it also had a narrative that was, moved at such a pace. Another thing to note is the soundtrack. Wonderful soundtrack. I always remember this soundtrack, and it's just really great, and. Works so well as well, the soundtrack is used throughout the film to great effect, to kind of keep the film moving. Such a charming film, the characters, Lassard as well, played by George Gaynes. He's one of the greatest in the franchise, really. They do eventually make him more comedy relief, but even then, he's one of the characters that kind of, he stays true to this character throughout most of the films, more than the others, you could say, and maybe Tackleberry as well. But yes, Tackleberry was another great character, in this film, and just great acting, great writing in this film. I generally think this is a great film. There's also a romance as well in this film, not to be taken again too seriously, but it does really, really work. Pretty much everything in this film works. The dynamics, the relationship between Captain Harris and Mahoney is really, really just, it's absolutely brilliant. The way it works throughout this film, and the different twists and everything that goes on. But yes, that's one of the things that keeps this film moving at such in such a way is that relationship actually between Harris and Mahoney. It's so enjoyable, entertaining, but it's just such a kind of a genius way to bring out the two different characters, and kind of bring out the humanity in the film. You've also got these two guys as well. They're some of my favourites. They're not. I don't think they're in much of the other ones. Maybe not even any of them. They're the two guys that get shave their heads at the beginning. They were such great characters in this film, and all the comedy with them, was absolutely brilliant. The bit where they went into that bar, just so funny, so memorable. But as I say, this film, it never really goes over that mark. The tone is very consistent, very, very consistent for a comedy. And it always has this control, this contained feel, restrained. And it never really goes over the line. And these characters are some of the best in it, actually. But just really all the characters, Hightower's arc as well, quite moving. And just all the characters in this film are great. The writing, the acting performances, Lassard, Harris, they keep it, they keep the film kind of at bay. They don't let it go out of hand. These characters, very grounded comedy. And people have criticised this film. All the police academies. But I don't really quite see it. It's still a very, very underrated film. It's just odd. And it's fine if you don't like it, but I absolutely love this film. It's actually surprisingly on my list still of favourite films, 500 favourite films. And yeah, I just love this comedy, and it's also, a film that can be taken seriously, and you can get invested. That's the thing, you can get invested in these characters, their arcs, and it's the perfect balance between the comedy, the parody, and actually bringing its own sort of thing, the investment to all these things, the characters and everything. Perfect balance throughout, really. And yes, it does have that, that first 5 minutes that aren't quite anywhere near the level of the rest of the film. But from then onwards, really, it's I can't really find too many flaws for what it is. And it never quite. It's never one of the best films ever made or something like that. One of the very best. But it's among my favourite comedies, and it does have some quite genius moments, and overall it's a great film for me. Every act, very well shot as well, and it's got this very nice look and feel to the film, the atmosphere, very, very warm film, charming film, and something that for me, they never quite, the sequels reached this level. It's the jokes. They had still some really good jokes in the other ones, the first three. But really, in terms of the actual arc, the progression, and the balance and the restrained feel of this, and the fact that the character development and stuff, you cared about all these characters so much. This is the best Police Academy for me personally. I know that obviously it doesn't always appear at the top too much, but yes. For me, the first Police Academy is a great film. Not quite a masterpiece, but really, I think this is one of the most underrated films. And I don't quite see how this is panned. It's not cheap, I don't feel. Yes, you can say some of the sequels are, when it reaches that, 5, 6, 7, in particular, they are cheap. Yes, very gross out humour a lot of the time. But I don't believe this one is. I'm actually going to give this film a 97%. That's a really high score from me. That was higher than what I recently give to Floating Weeds, an Ozu film. But yes, Police Academy just works really. Apart from that first 5 minutes, on pretty much every level for a comedy, and the writing and everything, it just comes together at the end. The riot scenes at the end as well. That's another thing. The action, in this final act, it's just great. Everything. All the elements of filmmaking for a comedy, just great. And a film that really is among my favourites. It's not like my top 100 or anything, and it's not. It's not perfect. It's got flaws, and you can't fully take it seriously. It's not going to make you cry or anything. But for what it is, it's a comedy that can, for the most part, take really, really seriously, as well as You know, enjoy all the parody elements, and just hilarious from start to finish as well. You really 97%. Truly a great film, and yeah, it's unexpected. You know, not a lot of people would say that. But I generally do think it's great. I don't just enjoy it, I do think it's a great comedy. And yeah, just definitely think it's a film that really deserves a kind of re-evaluation, but I'm not holding out for that, you know. It's always going to be pretty panned and not taken seriously at all, probably because of the sequels as well, you know, the later on sequels. The kind of, you know, people just look at the franchise as a whole maybe, and they don't realise that these first few ones, you know, were actually, you know, good films. You know, and this is for me the best by far. But yes, next up I'll be reviewing the second Police Academy, which I also watched today actually. So thanks for watching my review of Police Academy.